Now, we're staying with GA, and I'm delighted to say Sarah Donovan joins to talk to us about the hurling final. We're having a mild disagreement about this earlier. Sarah, I think that everybody should be watching as much of this Limerick team as possible, because far from being boring, they're actually finding new and innovative ways to enthrall and entertain us.
Well, I made the decision to sit down inside the 21, the right-hand corner of the stadium, for the second half, so I could watch Gillan and Flanagan in full flight, and I was not disappointed. If any kid wants to know how to play corner forward, they should be watching Gillan. He was starting his runs touching the goalpost behind Owen Murphy, and he was making full tilt sprints left and right. Those are very brave runs to make as a forward, and that's the innovation that you're talking about, and I agree with you 100%.
What else? Because we can talk about the overarching and where everybody else is, and kind of ranking the contenders. What else did you notice from the game of the weekend?
I suppose from Tommy Walsh was talking last week about the aggression and what he was expecting from Kilkenny and how they were going to overturn this Limerick team, and Cian Lynch was left win far too much ball. He wasn't, turned over half enough, and he was the catalyst for everything that we saw. Crucially for me, I suppose, the slow start for Limerick, and look, that's probably not a surprise. Declan Hannon not starting, Kyle Hayes not starting, Dan Morrissey had to go in centre back. Cathal O'Neill did a massive amount of work in that second half, and I think John Kiley, while unhappy with 15 wides in the second half, will be happy with how Cathal O'Neill showed up in the second half.
We were talking, Colin brought up earlier a discipline issue. There was an elbow from O'Neill early in the first half to the helmet, which obviously it's to the helmet, so it's not seen the same as it would be if it was football and there was no helmet. Is there any little concern that maybe, or do they just iron that out by the time the championship rolls around, and like they sit him down and they say, look, we understand that you're trying to prove to us that you deserve your place in the team, but your performance is pretty good at the moment, you're going to be grand. How do you balance that out, the desire for the aggression and making sure that they don't end up picking up yellows or reds?
Yeah, well, look, we were chatting about William O'Donoghue a couple of weeks ago, and we were saying, you have to be aggressive, but you can't be so aggressive that the other man, the referee has to make a decision, I think is what you said. And Will O'Donoghue ended up getting reprimanded, by the CCC after the game and missed out on Sunday. And Barry Murphy then obviously got his opportunity in midfield instead. I think when you've got a competitive panel like Limerick, lads, as they make these mistakes and as the cameras show these mistakes up, it's the easiest way to learn, isn't it? You go into training Tuesday night and you try to be less aggressive. I was chatting to my friend Ian. I brought him to the match. He's South African, right? And he was listening to the Limerick lads behind us, and he turned to me at one stage and he said, what does your man mean by stand him up? Because there was one Limerick lad just kept roaring, stand him up, stand him up. And I suppose that's what they're looking for, is not to foul. These are big, aggressive men. The likes of Ger Shane, you can't leave your hands in. You have to stand players up. And I think the camera work, the video work, the analysis, that's what they'll be doing over the next few weeks, is try to limit the amount of frees that they give away.
Did Kilkenny get the matchups right, Sarah? Because you mentioned Hegarty there. I think Hugh Lawler was picking up Hegarty, Pádraig Walsh on Gillan. And for the early portion of the game, it looked to be working. Kilkenny started quite brightly, took Limerick a little bit of time to get into the game. But were those matchups, I guess, accurately pinpointed by Derek Lyng?
See, you'd base it off of what the first half looked like and how far up the field the Kilkenny lads were by comparison to how stretched the pitch was in the second half. Like, there was one Kilkenny forward inside the 21 for most of the first half, which allowed Limerick to kind of move out in twos and threes and always have a support man to deliver the right ball. In the second half, Kilkenny were pushed right back in. Flanagan and Gillan were hugging the goal line. At some stages they were actually sitting behind Owen Murphy, and Owen Murphy was walking out because basically the two boys were suffocating him. And I think because of that, it's difficult to say that the matchups worked, because where they were compensating, to try and cover off the likes of Ger Shane and the likes of Cian Lynch, there was no pressure on Nicky Quaid.
Is those early starts that I mentioned, Limerick, we saw it against Tipperary as well, I think in the semi-final, where they maybe don't start games too quickly. Now I'm clutching at straws here to find something that is maybe half weak about this Limerick team, but those quick starts in games, teams, if they can bang in a couple of goals early on, maybe that's a way for a team to target them. But then the Limerick fitness is so strong that ultimately it's irrelevant.
but then teams have to start being brave about, getting turnovers and having a player high enough up the field to be able to turn over a Limerick back. I think the start, Seamus Flanagan scored the first point from play after 16 minutes. And alluding to my friend Ian, the South African, he was sitting there and he was going, God, I thought this Limerick team were, the best team in the country. And it was just that in those first 10, 11 minutes, they were dropping a lot of ball. The ball wasn't going to hand. They cleaned it up from 15 minutes on, and there was no question after that. But they looked very nervy in the first 15 minutes. It wasn't as clinical and clean cut as we are used to seeing them. And I suppose that's what they'll look for over the next 2 weeks before the Waterford game, is to get those early passes to hand and just be more clinical in that early phase.
That has been a feature, notwithstanding the All-Ireland final last year, where obviously they started like a house on fire. But if you think back to the water breaks and the sense that Connacht had to come on and have a chat with them, just to remind them, it feels a little bit now like it's more kind of evolutionary, where the team is almost assessing what the opposition is doing, working out, okay, this is what you're going to do, I understand now what your challenge is going to be, and then they just overwhelm you with the quality they have. Can I make the case for Kilkenny actually being relatively happy with what happened yesterday? If we take it, like, let's just take it for granted that Limerick are going to be at least 5 to 7 point favourites in every game they play for the rest of the year. If you're Kilkenny, you're getting players finally up to a level of preparedness and fitness that they hadn't been at. The Ballyhale players still aren't fully back. Obviously TJ was on the bench, but Adrian Mullen didn't play the full game, and I suspect when these two teams meet again, Adrian Mullen will play every last second of the match, and he'll be back at like full inter-county level of preparedness and fitness. They were savage. They were absolutely savage in the tackle in the first half, to the point where they could have had many bookings themselves more, but the referee allowed that to go. And if Owen Murphy is like his normal self, Barry Nash doesn't beat him at the near post for a goal. It's a 3-point game at half time, and they're feeling pretty good about life. So I can see a world where Kilkenny are like, okay, it might feel like we've been humiliated here, but bear in mind we have bigger fish to fry, and we will see this team down the road.
Were you not frustrated by the way they recycled the ball? They kept going backwards. So while they were making some inroads in the first half, they spent a lot of time looking to go back to field. And I think that's because they don't have those forwards who can penetrate that half back line and full back line, and they were looking for the easier option. Paddy Deegan scored a point from 100 yards. All of their scores were between the 45 and the halfway line and behind it. You need goals to beat Limerick. So I think the fact that they at no point looked like they were going to threaten, I think Quaid brought off 2 fairly handy saves, but lads, goals need to beat Limerick, and Kilkenny weren't anywhere near looking like going to score a goal. And that's what my concern would be. And I hated how often they went backwards. Hated it. It was like football.
And there wasn't really a high press either, Sarah, like that. Limerick almost walking out from the full back line unopposed. Like there wasn't that pressure that you'd maybe like to see. But then again, that seemed like a tactic that was decided on before the throw-in.
Yeah, but I suppose the question there is then, where is that bravery going to come from to beat Limerick? Because you're going to need that. How come Gillan and Flanagan can stand on top of the opposing goal line, but no other team can actually push Limerick to that level? Because it appears that they need an extra player around their midfield and half back line to be able to, I suppose, give that support, because no team can go 15 on 15 with Limerick right now. None. And that's the problem. Have
some teams lost to Limerick before the game starts? Like, is there a fear there? We spoke about fear this morning. Ger said fear doesn't exist. Now, we were talking about the Bank Holiday Sunday fear. To be fair, it's something different. But in terms of Limerick and teams preparing to face Limerick,
I said it's made up, but go on.
It's made up. Well,
they're different things.
Is fear when it comes to playing Limerick made up, or is there a genuine, almost psychological barrier up playing this Limerick team at the moment?
No, I think the only issue is that inside full back line. It's just that, do you have a quality 6 forwards to be able to cause them problems? And I know I've been quite negative about Waterford over the last few weeks, but is it the pace that Waterford have and that breaking the lines and being able to penetrate that half back line and full back line? Are they the only team with enough pace to be able to take them on? Because Kilkenny didn't look like they had 6 forwards who were able to test each one of the backs. In other parts of the field, I think teams do have the players to be able to take them on, but I don't think the six backs can be actually I suppose, challenged sufficiently so that there isn't that overrun, that Barry Nash doesn't have that freedom to go up and down the park that he did yesterday.
He took his chance pretty well, all the same. Is there a world, though, where fully fit Walter Walsh, fully fit TJ Reid, and all of a sudden the game is a bit more balanced? Look, and we are clutching at straws here. I do think that there's an element of Terminator 2 to Limerick at the moment. They can reform in whatever form they want. They can mimic you. They can. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up was the quality of their hand passing, because we keep talking about the quality of their stick passing. It's unbelievable. It's right out where everybody needs to be. But they were throwing the ball around like the Lakers. It was amazing.
Some of the throws were
actual throws.
Actual throws, and now the only person in the first half, I think Cian Lynch, an exquisite hand pass in the first half, and I mean exquisite by the fact that it was a noticeable hand pass. Everything else is on the line, and I think they really need to clean that up, because it's very frustrating to watch. It shouldn't be part of the game, and that's the only thing that I would say about it, is their hand passes leaves a lot to be desired.
As in it from a legal perspective, because it's incredibly accurate. They were getting out of tight corners where you're like, oh, this is really good pressure, very physical, very intense, and then all of a sudden the hand pass goes and they're back and they're free, and there's a point and you're like, oh wow.
Yeah, but lads, it's on the edge. You're not like some of them are genuinely throws, and there's not a clear movement from the palm through, and don't like to see it, and it is creeping in with the team because they are moving that so quickly. They are, so they definitely have to clean that up.
And is it up to the referees to clean it up, or is it up to them to not use this anymore?
I think there was at least 4 different times in the game on Sunday when they were pulled back. So the referee certainly is more cognizant of it, and that's the crowd were getting irate over it. That and the 15 wides that Limerick posted in the second half. You can love your team, but you can be frustrated with your team.
Fair enough.
Your team can be brilliant. And equally, Jesus, the groans out of the Limerick fans in the last 10 minutes were pretty loud, and it was a surprise because the 2 lads inside were on fire. So why the lads were pot-shotting it from 10, 50, 60 yards didn't make any sense.
Trying not to run up a score on purpose, maybe, just to, I don't know.
I don't think that's it. I know Ger O'Takerty had 2 mad, long range efforts, we'll say, right? That didn't come off. But then Diarmuid Byrne's an exquisite point. I don't know if you remember it, lads. The stadium gasped. There was some exquisite moments, but then you've got the madness mixed in, and that's league, isn't it?
They are better, undoubtedly, than they were this time last year. And look, pending any injuries in the Munster Championship, but they seem like they're more capable of dealing with those. A much deeper squad than we even thought they would have at the start of the season. So, if anything, they look even more entrenched as the number 1 team by a distance.
Yes, but if you consider their slow start, and we said that that's possibly down to the number of changes that occurred in the first half, it took them 16 minutes to find their rhythm. Would that suggest that the players that they brought in are still not at the level? So they do need everyone, the 16, 17 players who are tried and tested. If they were to have injuries, or if they were to have to do without the likes of Declan Hannon, Kyle Hayes, Tom Marcy didn't start, Will O'Donoghue, and it took them that amount of time to get into games, would the likes of Tip and Waterford really punish that?
All right, we'll leave it there. Sarah, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Sarah Donovan giving us some thoughts on the Hurling League final.